So today is the first class on this topic, this Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So as an introduction, I want to give you an idea of the significance of this system. This is philosophical system. Please remember, yoga is not a physical exercise. The physical exercise part forms only very small, almost insignificant part of the yoga system. Yoga is one of the most important of the 6 theistic systems of Indian philosophy. To give you an outline, I shall try to give a broad picture of the evolution of Indian thought, its broad classifications. Indian philosophical tradition is very broadly classified into 2 main streams. The one, the theistic, the other, the atheistic. Theistic systems of philosophy are 6 in number. Of these 6 theistic systems of philosophy, yoga is one of the most important. So, to understand its place in India's philosophical tradition, I shall give a broad outline. These 6 theistic systems of philosophy are the Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Vedanta and Mimamsa. These are called 6 systems. To give just a brief description, Nyaya means the system of Indian logic. It is expounded in a series of small pithy statements which are not in full sentences, just a few statements, few words together. Sometimes they could be in the form of a phrase. Certain words put together which contain a very deep metaphysical and spiritual implication. This is the meaning of sutra. Sutra can mean a thread in which so much of philosophical meaning is loaded. So that's the meaning of sutra. There is a famous definition: alpaksharam asadhiknam saravat vishwato mukham astobham anavadyamcha sutram sutravido viduhu. This is the definition, because at the beginning we had to understand the true implication of what a sutra is. Otherwise you won't be able to understand anything. Atha Yogani Shastranam is the first sutra. Really speaking, it is not in full sentence. There is no verb, there is no clearly defined subject, object, adjective, adverb, nothing. Many such statements you find in Indian philosophical literature. It's called sutras, pithy statements. These statements become meaningful. Their true meaning becomes obvious when we read it with the help of a commentary. So the definition is this: first of all, a few words, and then these few words should contain a definite philosophical, metaphysical implication, and it should be beyond any doubt. And then it should contain an idea which is acceptable and universal in nature, and there should be no repetition. All these qualifications are necessary to qualify to be a sutra. So Patanjali's system of philosophy are in fact written in these small pithy statements. This is true of all these 6 systems of Indian philosophy. As I said earlier, Nyaya is the first one, Indian logical system. Its original exponent was Gautama, who may have lived around 3000 BC. And another one is Vaisheshika. It is some kind of Indian atomism, where they speak about one substratum which is minute in dimension and which constitutes the entire universe. Its exponent was Kanada. Then Sankhya and Yoga. Sankhya is the theory, Yoga is the practice. Sankhya is the metaphysical and philosophical aspect, Yoga is the practical aspects. Sankhya philosophy was expounded by Kapila, and of course we know the Patanjali Yoga system of philosophy was expounded by Patanjali. They are all great saints and sages who lived in ancient times in India. Mostly they lived in forest hermitages, and people went to them to learn all these spiritual ideas. Among the students there were kings, princes, common people. They came from all over the then civilized parts of the world. For your information, there were several thousands of students in Nalanda University, which was established around 3rd century BC, and thousands of the students were from China, today's Japan, Cambodia, Far Eastern places, and from 2nd century onwards there were many from Alexandria and other places. So they all flocked to these universities. So Sankhya system of philosophy is the philosophical contribution of a great sage called Kapila, purely dualistic and realistic nature, a metaphysical and epistemological nature. Yoga is a practical aspect. And Vedanta, as we know very well, Vedanta is the metaphysical, spiritual teachings of the Upanishads, which these ideas were expounded by Vyasa for the first time, later developed by other subsequent thinkers. Mimamsa system is the ritualistic and ceremonial system of philosophy based on Vedic tradition, Vedic culture. It's a broad view. So these are the 6 theistic systems of Indian philosophy. Theistic systems do not mean that they believe in a creator God. In India's philosophical heritage, theism implies belief in the authority of Vedas. That is the criterion for judging whether a system of philosophy is theistic or atheistic. Then there were 6 atheistic systems of philosophy in ancient India. One was the so-called Indian materialism, this Charvaka system. They were not hedonists or Epicureans. They believed that there exists nothing beyond matter. Whatever you see with your eyes, whatever you enjoy with the senses, the present, the empirical, phenomenal experience is the only thing to be cared for. There is nothing beyond the present. There is nothing beyond the 5 senses of perception and mind. That was the Indian school of materialism is supposed to be a contribution of a great saint of ancient times. Among the saints there were non-believers also, atheists also. They were strongly established in their own moral philosophy, but they did not believe in any transcendental moral authority. That's all. It's called Charvaka system. Brihaspati was a saint who is exponent of this. The second atheistic system was the famous Jaina philosophy. Jains, in the sense, Jains did not believe in God. At the same time, they did not believe in the authority of the Vedas. But they practiced extreme asceticism, fasting, physical torture, just to go beyond the body consciousness. But they did not believe in God, and they did not believe in the authority of the Vedic literature. Then there were 4 systems of Buddhist philosophy, which I used to mention frequently in the last series of classes, but I shall repeat again. The 4 schools of Buddhist philosophy were Shunyavada, the doctrine of emptiness, which you may be familiar with, doctrine of emptiness or voidness, subjective idealism, the 2 schools of realism called Sautrantika and Vaibhashika. I am trying to go rather fast through this preliminary introduction, just to give an idea of the place of Patanjali system in India's philosophical tradition, world philosophical tradition. So coming back to the Buddhist tradition, a few more words I should say. Buddha originally did not teach any elaborate metaphysical system. Buddha's main concern was to live in this world peacefully, doing harm to nobody, and to practice certain fundamental ethical, moral values. It was essentially a realistic, humanistic system. Buddha was not concerned about the absolute reality. He did not deny it, but he did not affirm it. So Buddhism is sometimes called a kind of agnostic system. Very often Buddha is wrongly described as a non-believer or an atheist, which is really speaking wrong. Buddha was an agnostic. He did not care for a creator God, and he did not care much for life beyond this empirical existence. And his main concern was to live a happy life in this world, without grief, without sorrow, which is called dukkha in Sanskrit language. So, this was Buddha's contribution. It was a purely humanistic, practical, realistic, down-to-earth way of life. But from 2nd century onwards, Buddhism started developing a number of philosophical systems. Please remember, Buddha was born, at least according to many historians, in 560 BC and passed away in 480 BC. That means he lived for 80 years. From 2nd century onwards, Buddhism started developing elaborate metaphysical systems. And 2 broad streams evolved among the Buddhist Sanghas. One was the Mahayana system, which became very popular and very much acceptable in countries like Japan, China, later on many of the Far Eastern countries. There is a Mahayana system. The other one was more ascetical, more individualistic system. It's called Hinayana system. They called Theravada Buddhism, or it's called Hinayana system, which had its followers mostly in countries like Sri Lanka, Burma, Siam and such countries. That's all. So these 2 broad Buddhist groups gave birth to 4 important schools of philosophy, which is called later schools of Buddhism. 2 idealistic schools, 2 realistic schools. Mahayana Buddhism developed 2 important idealistic schools. One was the Shunyavada, which is called Doctrine of Emptiness, Doctrine of Voidness, which is becoming very popular in Western countries, especially from 1960s, 70s onwards. Mostly because a large number of Tibetan lamas who fled from Tibet translated many of these books from Chinese and Tibetan languages, and also from Sanskrit into English language. It's called Shunyavada system. This was the first school of idealism. The second one was subjective idealism. It's called Yogacara, subjective idealism. And then the other branch, Hinayana system, developed 2 schools of realism. One is Sautrantika and Vaibhashika. They believed in the real existence of empirical things. They were not idealists, they were realists. So these 6 systems of philosophy, which all developed in India, the 4 schools of Buddhism, later Buddhism, plus Jaina and Charvaka system, the ancient Indian materialism, they were all atheist systems. They did not believe in the authority of the Vedas. Patanjali system, yoga philosophy, did believe in the authority of Vedic literature. That is one important point. Sometimes theism is defined as an approach which believes in the continued existence of our life. This body is, this life is not the end of the journey. When we are born, we have to work, and then we die, and that's the end of the journey. Beginning with a cradle and ending with a piece of stone in the cemetery. This is not human life. Patanjali says human life continues to exist. Means this life doesn't end with a full stop, it ends with a comma, to be very short. That is Patanjali's system. So Patanjali also explains and gives deep, mystical, very insightful ideas as to why we behave the way we are behaving today. What are the mysteries of human mind? What are the tendencies and impressions that we gather in our mind? We sometimes feel that we can't help behaving in a particular manner. Kind of helplessness. We want to do certain grand, good things. Intellect wants to do things, but mind would allow. There is a conflict between what we want to do and what we are able to do. There is a conflict, there is an inner warfare between what we would like to do. Many wonderful things we would like to do, but we can't do that. The mind suddenly creates a hurdle, hindrance, an obstacle. So why this happens? What are the tendencies and impressions that we carry from previous life? We may be able to explain some of our tendencies, impressions, the way we behave. We may be able to explain with the help of childhood experiences, childhood memories. If a psychiatrist may be able to help you by taking you back to your childhood days, and through regression, through hypnotism, he may be able to give some clues as to why we behave in a particular manner. Patanjali takes the logic beyond this life. If we are what we are today because of what we did yesterday, then this logic doesn't end with it goes beyond life, beyond this life. The logic of cause and effect, the logic of relationship between our activities in the formative period of our life and our own behavior today. If this cause and effect relationship exists, then it should exist as a cause and effect relationship between our previous life experiences and our behavior, a tendency or character that we display in this life. Now, what are these tendencies? What are these hidden, inexpressible behavior patterns that lie within the lower levels of our mind, and how we can improve, how we can control our mind? These are some of the questions which Patanjali deals with. So, I shall just give a brief analysis of the text as a whole, because we are going to deal with this text elaborately. So, first of all, you have to remember, this is Patanjali's philosophy is expounded in a series of small pithy statements which are called sutras, which are not full sentences. Sometimes they can be in the form of full sentences, but not always. Small pithy statements. He divides his whole work into 4 sections. The first part is called Samadhipada, where he deals with the technique, the aims, and the methods of concentration. How to achieve this concentration. The second pada is called Sadhana Pada. It deals with means, methods to achieve this goal. The third part, which is called Vibhuti Pada, deals with some supernatural powers that we automatically obtain as we practice in yoga. This will be very interesting, in fact. See, after all, Patanjali gives a very scientific and rational analysis of the workings of human mind. Human mind can become a very effective tool, and it could become a great help and friend and guide in our day-to-day life. It could also become a terrible enemy. Mind can be our best friend, and mind could be our worst enemy. So if we can somehow try to understand the mystery behind the workings of human mind, then we can improve our life, our attitudes, and our behavior. So, along with this concentration, disciplining and sublimation of mental powers, certain supranatural faculties also will be produced. These are byproducts. They are not to be taken very seriously according to Patanjali. These are byproducts. If one knows to practice yoga, will become capable of doing many things. So Patanjali also insists on certain fundamental disciplines for every practitioner of yoga, because concentration, as I said earlier, intensifies and hyperactivates some of the normally dormant nerve system of our body. For example, pranayama, certain complicated asanas will suddenly intensify the activities of some of the nervous systems. So this practice generates energy, heat, and also enthusiasm, dynamism, physical dynamism, mental dynamism, intellectual dynamism. It's like fuel. Now, before we intensely practice yoga, we should get established in certain fundamental spiritual and moral disciplines. Without attaining these fundamental moral discipline, without getting fully established in these spiritual moral ideas, if we try to practice yoga, even physical, even some of the complicated yoga asanas, Sirsasana, Siddhasana, all these you find here, you come to asana, because Patanjali doesn't give much importance to asanas. Patanjali gives only one sutra, Sthiram Sukhamasana. The physical posture part of the yoga is compressed into a single sutra, where Patanjali says we should be able to sit for a long time in a relaxed mood without feeling the body consciousness, without feeling that we are this body, going beyond body consciousness. So this is the real purpose of yoga. Asana is called. Sthira means you should be able to sit for a long time. Sukha means in a relaxed mood. There should not be any effort behind. If there is effort behind, there will be no joy. There will be no sukha. So, out of this single sutra, the later saints, developed this elaborate yoga system of exercises. The Yoga Herata Samhita, Hatha Yoga Pratipika, and Shiva Samhita. These are the three most important foundational books which constitute the Bible of modern yogic practices, yoga practices, so to speak. So Patanjali gives importance to these postures, but only for a higher purpose. There is a yoga beyond the physical dimension. That's what Patanjali is hinting. And he says, before we take up these yoga exercises, we must be very careful to follow 10 important internal and external disciplines. We will deal with that part only later on, but before starting the first sutra, I want to refer to this important teaching of Patanjali. Yama and Niyama, these are the two fundamental disciplines that Patanjali says. Yama means ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, parigraha, which means non-violence, truthfulness, then non-covetousness, not stealing or taking things from others due to greed, then chastity, that means disciplined life. Even householders can be very disciplined, can follow certain fundamental moral, ethical, spiritual ethos in their household responsibilities. And also not taking gifts from others. I shall explain broadly, then I shall go to the psychological part of it. So, niyamas are tapas, sauja, santosha, swadhyaya, isvara, pranidhana. Internal and external purity, and then mental rigor, concentration, and then contentment, reading holy books, and surrender to God. These are the 10 broad disciplines. We are going to deal with these subjects very elaborately later on. But these are very important, so I want to refer to them at this stage. This is because these sutras come later. But these are very important, so I refer at this point, at the beginning of the class. Now, what happens when you practice pranayama, concentration, breathing exercise, yoga? You try to intensify. You intensify your mental faculties, ability to concentrate. If a person attains a great ability to concentrate, his mind becomes a powerful weapon. You read the lives of many of the greatest saints in the world and also some of the scourges of humanity. Both these groups of people have tremendous mental power. Hitler had a tremendous power of command, concentration. Napoleon had it. Great scientists have it. Great musicians have it. They identify themselves with their cause in front of them. Great saints also had it. So, our mind can become a very effective, very useful, very friendly tool in our hands if we are good men, if we follow certain spiritual, ethical, moral principles. But people without these moral, higher ethical ideas, if they develop higher mental faculties, they become scourge of humanity. Some of the bloodiest characters the world human history has produced had tremendous mental power. And also some of the greatest saints and sages, spiritual personalities had tremendous mental power. So, Patanjali says, before we intensify our mental faculties through concentration, we must fully get established in moral and ethical principles. Example, ahimsa. For ahimsa is the first of the yamas. Very universal, very fundamental. Just give an example. Ahimsa means non-violence. Suppose a violent person who is prone to violence, who may be an outlaw, with a strong criminal record, if he develops higher mental faculties through concentration, what happens? His ability to do evil will be intensified. If a person who is greedy, if he tries to practice some of this, he will not become a yogi, but in the course of some of his practices, his mental faculties may increase. This ability to concentrate, to accomplish great things in a short time, all these faculties, skills will develop. What happens? He becomes much more greedy than ordinary people who don't practice in concentration. So, therefore Patanjali says, you must be established in ahimsa, non-violence, before you try to practice yoga. We should not get away with the impression that, so the yoga, we cannot practice yoga because we are not fully established in ahimsa. So yoga is out of bound for us. We should not get away with that impression. Yoga can be practiced by all. We can go on increasing these higher spiritual values, spiritual attitudes in our mind in the course of practicing yoga. So, once we understand that money, wealth, material power, all these are not ultimate values in human life. They are necessary means, but they do not constitute the supreme goal of human existence. Then we are able to practice absence of greed. It's called asteya. Some other similar qualities Patanjali has. Again, contentment, one of the niyamas, contentment, inner contentment. That also is a great spiritual and ethical value that we must practice. Otherwise, we will be always looking for more and more of material comforts, material joy, enjoyments, and so on. So, some of these spiritual and ethical values should be practiced along with the practice of concentration. Otherwise, practice of mental concentration will not be always helpful. Sometimes it could be harmful. That's the implication behind. Just I will give an example. Now we will begin the first of the sutras. Today I wanted to start at this one sutra. Those who have got a book, you can look at the book. The first sutra is in Samadhipada, Atha Yoga Anushasana. That's the first sutra. Is it? Atha Yoga Anushasana. Only 3 words. Atha means now, henceforth. Now onwards, that's a meaning. That word has got a great lot of significance. You can imagine Patanjali's technique. Atha means now we have seen enough of this world. We have made enough money and suffered a lot. We thought our friends, our relatives, all these earthly human relationships are eternal. But people come, people go. So, people who have spent their whole lifetime for obtaining wealth, at one stage they realize that money cannot bring inner contentment and peace and happiness. So such people start asking the question, is there something beyond all this? That's the meaning of Atha. It could mean many things to many people. Sometimes we are forced to turn to spiritual life, to higher life, by circumstances. The wisest people are those who don't wait for a shocking experience to be forced to knock at the door of spirituality. So, very often, people need some shocking experiences. So Patanjali says, after going through all these empirical experiences, in search of happiness, joy, we come to a conclusion that eternal happiness is not obtainable in this relative world, at the material level. Money comes, money will go. Every material enjoyment, every happy experience in this material life has its opposite. unhappiness. So in the Gita, Lord Krishna makes a statement, Sukham atindigam yattat buddhigrahim atintriyam. What is the ultimate joy? A joy which has no opposite. A joy or satisfaction that we feel when we get a promotion, when we get a higher increment, when the stock markets show good results. That joy is short-lived because next day the stock markets may crash. So every happiness, every joy in this material world has its opposite. It is only relative. But is there a joy beyond this? A joy which has no opposite? That is what Lord Krishna calls Atintikam Sukha, means ultimate, absolute joy. A joy which has no counterpart, no opposite. A joy which is a kind of blissfulness, contentment, which is eternal. So when a person, after knocking in all, after going in all directions, knocking at all wrong doors, finally, when he turns to spiritual life, that state of mind is meant by the word Atha. Yoga, as I mentioned earlier, yoga can be defined as, from a spiritual point of view, yoga is defined as the union between the individual Atman, individual self, and the universal self. Jivatma, Paramatma, Aikyam, the Sanskrit word means the joining, the union between the individual self and the universal self. In fact, the word yoga itself comes from a Sanskrit root, dhatu, it's called yuj, means to join. When we expand, when we get rid of the wrong impression that we are only the physical body, we are intellect, then we expand our personality. People who live at physical level, we may be happy with shelter, food and clothes, that's all. But those who want to go beyond that, they want to read good books, they want to listen to music, they want to enjoy higher intellectual and mental enjoyments. So they transcend body consciousness. Yoga says we are beyond this body, we are beyond mind, we are beyond intellect. So this expansion, we are not just this human body or the psychophysical system which comes and goes, we are beyond all this. There yoga comes close to Vedanta. Vedanta teaches that the ultimate reality, God, in the highest sense of the word, is one all-pervading, omnipresent, supreme, divine consciousness, which is present in every living being. That is the teaching of the Vedanta. So, this is this universal consciousness, universal self. So once we get beyond this obsession with our own body consciousness, when we join with the universal self, that is called yoga. That's the meaning of yoga here. Anushasanam actually in Sanskrit means Sishtanam Upadesha, means, and there is a very interesting aspect to this word. Yoga, Chitta Vritti Nirodha means the Hatha Yoga, Anushasanam. It's historically and from a theological point of view. Anushasanam means this is not a new doctrine which Patanjali discovered. This supreme spiritual science existed long before Patanjali was born. Patanjali, through his own meditation, through his concentration, through the practice of higher spiritual disciplines, raised himself to such a high level of supreme consciousness that he had an experience of this reality. What's the reality? That he is not this psychophysical body mechanism. He is one all-pervading, omnipresent, immanent reality. This experience he had. So it doesn't start with him. It is coming down the ages from saints and sages, great teachers transmitting this supreme truth to their disciples. And like that, this succession of teachers and disciples continued. So this particular part of the sutra means this great teaching is coming down from the times of great sages of the ancient times, who have taught this supreme spiritual truth to their disciples, and through this succession of teachers and disciples, this mystery of yoga, mystery of human life is being expounded. This is the first sutra. I think we will, if you want, we will have an interaction for the next 10 or 15 minutes. If you have any questions, suggestions as to how the classes should continue in the coming days, you can forward your suggestions, you can ask questions, we can have an active discussion. I especially invite you to come forward with your own suggestions. I mean, what kind of exposition will be most helpful to you? Can just come.
One question, Swami. Do you have any particular text you recommend that people attending the class use?
Okay. Well, I would recommend Swami Vivekananda's exposition of Raj Yoga, because it is very rational and very psychological in his approach and very modern. You can have your own choice, but this is the one book which I would suggest, because you can get flashes of experience. If you read Swami Vivekananda's exposition, you suddenly feel that the author himself had a bit of this experience. That gives you that intimacy of real experience in his own life. So that's a book which I would like to recommend.
Do we know much about Patanjali?
You want to hear? Okay.
Well, if he was,
I can explain.
I mean, beyond body consciousness,
Yes.
maybe it doesn't matter.
Yes.
But
Patanjali is supposed to have written 3 famous books. Of these 3, this is the second most well known. His most famous and his most important contribution was to Sanskrit grammar. So it is called Mahabhashya. It will, if you want the whole book, it may be with this commentary, 3-4 volumes, the size of Encyclopedia Britannica. So that book he completed at least 1800 years BC. So his most famous contribution is Mahabhashya. Bhashya means commentary, Maha means great. So that's the last authority on Panini's grammar. Panini wrote his Ashtadhyayi, and Katyayana wrote a commentary, and Patanjali wrote a super commentary on both. So in the present edition that is available comes into 4 volumes, each volume the size of Encyclopedia Britannica. So that is supposed to be the most elaborate grammatical work in modern philology. In fact, Patanjali completed the standardization of Sanskrit grammar almost 1800 years BC. That means you can say almost 3,700 years before Fowler and Hornby standardized British English, and maybe 3,900 years before Chomsky wrote his famous books in American language. That's a great contribution. His contribution to philology and phonetics and linguistics supposed to be. He's the last master, final authority If Patanjali says something, that's the last word in Sanskrit language. And this another book is, he wrote a famous book on Ayurveda, I mean Indian School of Medicine, Ayurveda, this Indian School of Medicine. And this is a third book. So there is a famous verse which, if you are interested, I can read. The Sanskrit verse comes, Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam shailischa vaidyagena yopakarutam pravaram muninam Patanjalim pranjali ratadosmi. Patanjali washed off three garbage, so to speak. First he says, he developed a method of cleaning our mind. Malam he means dirt or filth. Chittasya malena means he first of all, his first effort was, this is first so how to clean up our mind, how to purge our mind of all undesirable tendencies, impressions, how to get rid of these conflicts, these depression, anxiety, all these problems. How to lead a happy, healthy life at the mental level. So, he took up a broom and cleansed our mind. That is the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. Second one, he purged our speech of all its dirt and filth. He cleansed our speech because he wrote the famous book on Katyayana's commentary. That is again its commentary on Ashtadhyayi Panini. It is called Patanjala Mahabhashya. The most authentic and most elaborate and the most voluminous book on grammar, which belongs to 18th century BC. And the third book, how to get rid of our diseases, bodily diseases. For that, he wrote this famous book on Ayurveda. Ayurveda, Indian School of Medicine. So his main job was to take an operation cleanup of our mind, word, our speech and body. That's his great contribution. So this.
So Swamiji, do we know in what order these books were written?
Many of these sutra literature, it's called sutra literature, which is a second stage of the evolution of metaphysical literature in India, from the Vedas, Upanishads, then Sutra. So many of them were memorized by teachers, disciples. So they were preserved through oral tradition, not by writing.
Okay.
So maybe I think in 18th century, the last decades of 18th century, in beginning of 19th century, there was an effort to put together all possible manuscripts which were scattered all over Indian subcontinent, and there were different schools of different versions of this manuscript. They were all brought together and they printed the standardized version of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So they were all preserved through oral tradition, not through written tradition. So any otherwise I should go to the next sutra. Sorry.
Did Patanjali study any of the Buddhist schools of
Yeah. Well, Patanjali must have lived before Buddha was born. Buddha was born in 560 BC. Patanjali must have lived before that. Because Patanjali's system, yoga, is allied to the Sankhya system, which are much more ancient than Buddhist systems of ours. But there were commentators on Patanjali's system. Some of them were Buddhist. Vijnana Bhikshu was one of the commentators. He was a Buddhist. So Shankaracharya also wrote a commentary on Patanjali's system. Vyasa, not the Vyasa, the author of Mahabharata, but another Vyasa most probably. He also wrote a commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Any? Please.
Isn't there a story, more like a mythology about his own birth? How Patanjali was born?
Patanjali is supposed to be an incarnation of Ananta. That story. I don't want to go into that aspect of it. Because Ananta is a serpent with 1,000 heads and all that. I don't want to enter into that part of it. Many such stories. Patanjali's system is very rational and very psychological. So, and when we understand that he wrote a masterly work on Sanskrit grammar to purify our speech, and work on Ayurveda to help us get rid of our bodily diseases, and also the Yoga Sutras to help us to get rid of undesirable tendencies. That itself is a great. So he must have, he was a historical figure. So then we have to leave the mythological behind to concentrate on this. The story is like that. He was an incarnation of Ananta, he was a serpent. Any other discussion? Patanjali is just to give an idea of his insight in human mind. He says every human skill is an expression of intensified mind. When we develop a high power of concentration, our mind becomes a strong weapon, an instrument. A yogi is able to focus his mind at will on anything, and he'll be able to master whatever skill or branch of learning he wants to master very easily and very quickly. And the technique that is described in the commentaries is very, 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 very psychological. See, when we do a book, when we read a book, for example, maybe 70% of our mind may be concentrated on reading that book. About 5% or 10% may be concentrating on the desk on which we are sitting, because we are touching the desk with our hands. And mind also may be listening to the sound that is coming from the street. So 10%, 5% will go to the street through audio, through the sound that's coming from the street, and we will be touching the desk, the table on which the book is kept. So hands will be touching the table. Maybe some people may be eating the chocolates, what do you call it? Gum, you know? That's called chewing gum. So taste also. So just imagine, Patanjali. So taste, tongue, touch the table, ears go to the street where the vehicle is moving, and eyes are looking at this book that we are reading. So practically only a fraction of our mental effort is focused on the real work that we are doing. But when a yogi does it, 100% of it goes to the book. There is less distraction, less dissipation, less waste of mental energy, mental concentration. The whole mind is concentrated on what the yogi is doing. That explains why they are able to remember great things, lot of things in their mind. Yes.
You said he wrote the greatest book or the greatest commentary on Sanskrit grammar. But when you read the Patanjali Sutra on Yoga, as you said, there is no grammatical nature to the sutras.
Yeah. Sutra is not supposed to be. A sutra is not supposed to be in tune with the rules of grammar. Sutra belongs to a particular system of condensing ideas in words. For example, Ashtadhyayi is the Bible of Sanskrit grammar, Ashtadhyayi. The last sutra of Ashtadhyayi is A. This is sutra. What do you make out of it? Now, actually it is a description of vowel sound, closed vowel and open vowels, Vivrudha, Samvrudha description. Now these are last sutras of Panini. Panini wrote more than 4,000 sutras. Some sutras are only two letters. Some may be one word. Many of them are just one word, Brahma Sutra. But Panini's Ashtadhyayi Vyakarana Sutra, the last one is this one. One, in fact, it is a description of the rules laid down for pronouncing open and closed vowels. Vivrudha, Samvrudha. Now, can you see, he is the greatest exponent of grammar. Ashtadhyayi begins, Sanskrit grammar begins as Panini. Can we say he didn't know grammar? So the same saint, sage, wrote Patanjali Mahabhashya with one end in view, with one goal in his mind, and so Patanjali Yoga Sutras with another goal. So sutras can never be fully understood with the help of a commentary. So the classical commentaries are Vyasa. Vyasa's Bhashya. Vyasa Bhashya is the most important commentary on Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Bhoja wrote a small work called Tiga, Bhoja Vritti it is called, and the other one is Shankaracharya also wrote. So there is a famous verse, if you are interested, Patanjali Yoga Sutra Bhashya Vivaranam Sri Shankaracharya. See, this is Patanjali wrote the sutras, Vyasa wrote the Bhashya, and Shankaracharya wrote a description of the Bhashya. So there is one verse in which students pay tributes to all the three great masters. Stuve Patanjalim Vyasam Shankaram cha Munitrayam Kartru Sutrasya Bhashyasya Kraman Vivaranasya cha. Meaning is this: Patanjali wrote the sutras, Vyasa wrote the commentary, means Bhashya, and Shankaracharya wrote a description of the Bhashya. That is Munitrayam, means three great sages of ancient times, who constitute the doctrinal part of the Patanjali system. Otherwise, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras will not be understood by students without an elaborate commentary. Swami Vivekananda's commentary has got one important characteristic. He himself practiced, and when Swamiji traveled all over India, he met many great practitioners of yoga, and he had very intimate conversation with some of these great, not only scholars, but practitioners. So Vivekananda came in contact with many of them, and he had held long discussions with them. And he was an extremely well-educated man of modern times. Swamiji had direct contact with great psychologists of those, William James and others. So that's why his comment, if you read his book, you find you are listening to a person who's talking about what he knew, what he was talking about. There is not that remotedness that comes from technicality. So that's the one important merit of Vivekananda's exposition. So, when he describes some of the problems that may arise if you start practicing this yoga without the help of a teacher, all those things, Swamiji explains. Many of the later exponents of yoga, like Rishikesh Sivananda is the great founder of Divine Life Society, many of them refer to Swami Vivekananda's teachings in their lectures, teachings. So I think if you have any more discussions, otherwise we'll continue in the next class. not next Friday, but next after that. So there will not be class next Friday, October 17th, because of the memorial service for Swami Vivekananda, the following this Saturday, October 18th. The next class will be on Friday, October the 24th at 7:30 p.m. So please remember, there will be no class next Friday, October the 17th. We have the memorial service for Swami Vivekananda ji, the following day, Saturday, October 18th. So our next class will be on Friday, October the 24th at 7:30. Thank you. Shanti, Shanti.